Bungie was back this week with a bigger TWAB than usual, with a big focus on Sandbox changes coming in the December 30th anniversary update. So we're not only getting paid and free content, but we're getting a big Sandbox update too, which is going to touch a whole lot of weapons. Well, today I'm going to go over the exotic weapon buffs and nerfs so you know what to expect in December's update. Well, if you're new around here or find this useful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for all the latest Destiny 2 content and turn on notifications by hitting that bell. And roughly 98% of viewers who watch This Week in Video Games aren't subscribed, so subscribe today and never miss an update. Well, without delay, let's dive into the buffs and the nerfs for exotic weapons in Season of the Lost. So first up, we've got the Vex MYTHOCLAST, and Bungie say, yep, we overbuffed this, and while it's kept in check by the peak shot potential of hand cannons, it's definitely melting faces. So in playtest we feel it's strong enough to be desirable without feeling free. So Bungie have reduced the aim assist stat by 25 and reduced the linear fusion rifle mode in aim assist cone scaler from 1.1 to 1.05, and now requires 3 eliminations in full overcharge mode instead of 2. Well, next up we've got the Fighting Lions. So this one wasn't a specific problem, but given an increasing frustration with breach grenade launchers in Crucible, so it seemed like a misstep to say, we hear you, and here's an infinite ammo version of the thing you're frustrated about in the same patch. So it should be clear to everyone that the full nerf isn't needed, so we're adjusting it. And note, this is not a full rollback. There's still a difference between almost infinite ammo and actual infinite ammo in how weapons are used, and in playtests where we tried to abuse infinite ammo, it was extraordinarily oppressive, much more so than we expected given that it had a ton of ammo previously. So Bungie say they've removed the multi-hit requirement, for example dealing any damage will grant a buff, and increase the buff to the reload stat from plus 50 to plus 70, and for example the reload will still be slow if you miss, but if you land any damage, Fighting Lion will reload faster than it did before the nerf, and also increase the buff duration to 7 seconds. Well, next up we've got ARBALEST. So Bungie say we always wanted this one to have utility in high difficulty PvE, but its lack of champion mods prevented that, and it's all about shield breaking already, so we're fixing that. So it now has intrinsic anti-barrier. So this one is going to be really good in endgame PvE, especially those Nightfalls, the Grandmaster Nightfalls, the Legend and the Master Nightfalls, and also the Legend and Master Lost Sectors too. Well, next up we got the Sleeper Simulant. I think this one's going to be an absolute monster. So Bungie say the delta between Sleeper and the best legendary linear fusion rifle wasn't large enough to make this a compelling option. So while it's going to benefit from the additional 10% damage buff, they've also given it some additional love. So they've increased the magazine size from 3 to 4 and increased the PvE damage by 6%. Well, next up we got the SUROS regime. So dual mode receiver always made SUROS a worse 360 RPM auto rifle, but fixing it wasn't a straightforward stat bump. So this may not make it mode dominant, but at least it makes it do what it was intended, turn it into a high impact auto rifle. So the dual mode receiver mode now grants the following in addition to its current effects. So we've got plus 30 in range and plus 3 in zoom. Well, next up we've got the CRYOSTHESIA 77K. So given the state of stasis and PvP at the start of Season 14, we deliberately shipped this weapon in a weak state, which almost physically hurt us, but it was the right decision. So not wanting to contribute to the problem of stasis as it was back then at the beginning of Season 14. But now we've had more time to evaluate the state of the sandbox, we've reworked the exotic to address its weaknesses in PvE, specifically the following pain points, so fire and release with a charged trigger, and losing all ammo on firing the free shot. So Bungie have buffed this by removing the variable trigger completely, so it now fires on trigger press instead of release, and that's going to make it feel much more responsive. The charged shot moved to a special reload, so getting a final blow with the sidearm enables the access to the special reload, and once the charged shot is fired, the weapon reverts back to the normal sidearm mode. And it does not cost you your entire magazine. And finally, the charged shot now causes AoE, which freezes AI and slows players, and direct hits will still freeze. So that one looks like a massive buff, and it looks like the CRYOSTHESIA 77K is going to be really good in that December update. Well, next up we've got the LEVIATHAN'S breath. So this bow is underused, so they wanted to give it a bump while also making its catalyst more interesting, and expect this type of catalyst tweak to become more common moving forward. So the catalyst now grants Archer's tempo perk in addition to its other effects. Well, next up we got the big one, and this is Whisper of the Worm. So the original DPS King has fallen out of favour, with a delay before the damage buff kicking in, making the weapon less usable in short damage phases, and optimal sustained damage requiring all critical hits, but not sufficiently rewarding precision. So what Bungie have changed is they've reduced the delay on activated Whisper's breathing from the catalyst from 2.1 seconds to 1.2 seconds. And White Nail magazine refill charged, it was 3 from inventory but now pulls 2 from inventory and 1 from thin air, so that is a massive change, and increased the damage in PvE by 10%. So Whisper of the Worm is going to be an absolute monster, and with that White Nail change of pulling 1 from thin air, it's really going to be good stuff. And I have a guide on the channel for how to get Whisper of the Worm, so I would recommend checking that out. Well, next up we've got D.A.R.C. So this sniper's damage has fallen behind as other options have been buffed, and its damage is dependent on crits, whilst also requiring 100% time on target, so we've improved the ease of use and bumped up the damage. So they have reduced the flinch, recoil and accuracy degradation by 50%, while Personal Assistant is active. And Personal Assistant now has a 1 second delay before deactivating when off target, and previously it was instant, and they've also increased the PvE damage by 20%. Well, next up we got Malfeasant. So for a weapon all about explosions, this hand cannon's explosions were a bit underwhelming, so they've increased the explosion damage by 50%. Well, next we got Dead Man's Tale. So Bungie said, we've seen this scout rifle's use drop dramatically on console since the recent nerfs, so we have spent some time tuning it in a way that benefits controller much more than mouse and keyboard. For example, we don't believe this buff will improve the weapon much on mouse and keyboard, specifically touching the hipfire grip with the catalyst. So note, this isn't actually branching the tuning between input devices, but the bits we touched are either only present or are much more impactful on controller. So increase the reticle friction fall off distance, so there's no effect on mouse and keyboard, less recoil, so reduced effect on mouse and keyboard, and improved accuracy, and that's got a reduced effect on mouse and keyboard. Well, next up we got the heir apparent catalyst. So there was a data error in the heir apparent catalyst, resulting in it granting too much damage resistance against players, and that has now been corrected, so it's got no effect in PvE. So reduced damage resistance against players from 75% to 25%. Well, next we got the LORENTZ driver. So the bonus ability energy feels extraneous when the damage buff is so strong, and we're limiting certain weapon sources of ability energy. So if you remove the ability energy regeneration on picking up telemetry. And finally, we got Traveler's Chosen. So the ability energy granted from the perk was on a curve that wasn't instantly intuitively understood. So similar to LORENTZ driver, it seemed appropriate to adjust this in PvP. And these changes aren't noticeable in PvE. So now it grants 10% ability energy per stack on activation, and previously it was more generous on low stacks and less generous on high stacks, and the average amount for about 10 stacks are unchanged. And reduce the stacks granted on Guardian Defeat from 3 to 2. So personally, I'm really happy to see the Whisper of the Worm get a nice buff. You know, the fact that it now pulls 2 ammo from reserve and 1 from thin air, you know, that could really be a nice change. Plus we get that extra 10% damage buff. Well, Sleeper Simulant looks like it's going to benefit from the 10% buff to damage for linear fusion rifles, as well as the 6% on top of that. I don't think that means a 16% buff. I think the 10% gets applied first, and then the 6% on top of that. Well, I'm a really big fan of SUROS Regime, and that is available from Xur this weekend at the time of the making this guide, so I'm really looking forward to using that one a little more. And then we've got the CRYOSTHESIA 77k. That definitely needed a buff. You know, I heard it got a pretty severe nerf close to release, given that people were super frustrated with stasis at the time, and releasing a stasis weapon back then when the community was in such a state probably wasn't the best idea. And then finally we've got ARBALEST. That looks like it's going to be really useful in endgame PvE content, with that ability to break the champion shields intrinsically. Well, that is it for all the exotic nerfs and the buffs, but let me know down in the comments what you think about the exotic changes, plus let me know if you think any buffs were missing. Well, that is it for this look at the exotic weapon changes coming in the December Sandbox update, and as always, thank you so much for watching. For more Destiny 2 content like this, hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to This Week in Video Games. If you want to join the community, check out the Discord link in the description, or you can follow me on Twitter at TWIVG Podcast. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.